Today, we are tackling something that hits home for every single one of us, aging. But maybe forget everything you thought you knew about getting older. We're diving deep into a really powerful argument, one that's challenging a lot of conventional wisdom. It's all inspired by the insights from Dr. David A. Sinclair's groundbreaking book, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to.
That's exactly right. And this isn't just, about adding a few extra years. It's more fundamental. It's about redefining what aging is, right down at its core, and exploring the science, the advancements that suggest, well, maybe we can live much healthier lives for much longer.
Okay, let's unpack this then. What really jumped out at me first from Sinclair's book is that his journey here, it isn't just academic, right? It feels deeply, profoundly personal. What were those moments, those experiences that really set him on this path?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how personal stuff can just ignite a whole scientific quest. Sinclair shares these incredibly vivid stories that really pushed him to question if aging had to happen the way it does. He talks first about his grandmother, Vera. She sounds like this amazing woman, just full of life. Even later on, she had the spirit of like a 6-year-old. And her life, sheltering Jews in World War II, living in primitive New Guinea, apparently got kicked off Bondi Beach for wearing a bikini way back when. But her final years, he says, were just incredibly difficult to witness. He felt, and this is a quote, the person she truly was had been dead many years at that point. That contrast, between her vibrant life and the end.
Wow, that's quite a statement.
Yeah. And then there was his mother, Diana, a lifelong smoker, sadly died quickly and painfully at 50 from lung cancer. He describes this awful transformation into, his words, a twitching, choking mass of cells as her neurons died, erasing her memories, even his last whispered words to her. So these experiences, they really forced him to grapple with death, with mortality. He mentions Robin Moran Tannig, the columnist, and Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society as things that made him confront it all.
Those are incredibly powerful stories. It really brings home the harsh reality of that decline. It is amazing how often those deep personal moments spark something huge scientifically. So what was the leap then that let him shift from absorbing this pain to actually building a scientific theory about aging?
Well, for centuries, like you said, scientists didn't really have a single unifying theory of aging. It was just seen as this messy, almost random breakdown. But Sinclair proposes something pretty radical. Aging fundamentally is a loss of information.
Information loss. How does that work in biology?
Right. So he clarifies there are two types of information. First, there's the digital information. That's our DNA. The ATCG code. This code, think of it like the hardware. It stays largely intact through life. His analogy is a DVD. The actual digital code on the disc isn't necessarily lost, even if the DVD itself gets scratched up.
Okay, so the blueprint, the DNA, is mostly stable. Where is the information loss happening then?
This is the absolute key. The other type of information, the one that does get lost, is analog information. And we call this the epigenome. Think of the epigenome like software. It tells the hardware which genes to turn on, which to turn off, when and where. It directs the whole show. And this is where the information gets corrupted over time. This loss of analog information, that's what leads to the chaos we call aging.
Okay, the software analogy helps, like a glitchy operating system.
Exactly. He uses another great analogy, the demented pianist. Imagine a cell is a piano. The DNA is the sheet music, right? A perfect composition. But the epigenome, that's the pianist. And over time, the pianist starts messing up, playing extra notes, hitting wrong keys. It creates what he calls epigenetic noise. The beautiful music, the concerto, just turns into chaos. And that chaos, that breakdown in reading the instructions correctly, Sinclair argues, that is aging.
That makes so much sense. It's the interpretation, the reading of the code that goes wrong.
Yeah.
But what causes the pianist to start hitting all those wrong notes? What's actually creating this epigenetic noise?
Okay, so the main culprits seem to be highly disruptive things happening to the cell. And the big one is broken DNA. When our DNA gets damaged, and this happens constantly, just from living critical repair, proteins have to rush in. Proteins like sirtuins?
Sirtuins, I've heard of those, the longevity gene.
Exactly. They're a family of enzymes, SIR1 through 7 in us mammals. Think of them as the cell's disaster response team. Normally, they sit at specific gene stations, regulating certain genes, keeping things quiet that should be quiet. But when there's a DNA break, they have to leave their posts to go fix the damage.
Right. Makes sense. Go put out the fire.
Precisely. But here's the problem. After the repair, they don't always go back to the right station, or they get delayed or distracted. So suddenly, genes that should be off might get turned on, or vice versa. That's the noise. That's the pianist hitting wrong notes because they left their sheet music to fix a broken piano string and got lost on the way back.
Okay. So the DNA damage itself isn't the direct cause of aging in this model, but the response to it, the scrambling of the epigenetic instructions.
That's the core of the information theory, yes. These sirtuins, they're absolutely central to what Sinclair calls the survival circuit. This is an ancient biological mechanism, like 4 billion years old, inherited from way back, even single-celled organisms like Magnus superstes, the great survivor. This circuit basically helps organisms hunker down and survive under stress, maybe lack of food, damage often by slowing down reproduction or growth to focus on immediate repair. Sirtuins orchestrate this whole process. And the thinking is, if we can understand how to influence them, maybe using mild stresses or specific molecules, we can nudge that circuit towards promoting longer-term health and resilience.
Wow. That completely reframes aging. It's not just things breaking down randomly. It's a specific kind of information failure, a loss of regulation. Has this theory actually been tested? Like, properly tested?
Oh, absolutely. Rigorously. Some of the early clues came from yeast studies way back. Mortimer and Johnston in '59 showed yeast cells had really different lifespans. Then Sinclair's own work with Leonard Garante at MIT was pivotal. They found these things called ERCs, extrachromosomal rDNA circles, basically little loops of DNA floating around. They showed these ERCs distract the yeast version of sirtuins, called SIR2, and make the yeast age faster. But, and this is key, if they added an extra copy of that SIR2 gene, the yeast lived about 30% longer.
So more sirtuin activity, longer life, at least in yeast.
Right. It showed that keeping that epigenetic stability, keeping the PNS focused, was crucial, but the really big one was the ICE mouse experiment.
ICV, induced chromosomal instability.
Exactly. They engineered these mice with a gene from slime mold, of all things, specifically to cause DNA breaks. But crucially, they targeted breaks in the non-coding regions, the junk DNA. So they weren't directly mutating important genes, they were just creating damage that needed repair, forcing those sirtuins off their normal stations.
And what happened to the mice?
They aged about 50% faster, showed all the classic signs: thinning hair, hunchbacks, cataracts, even signs of dementia. But here's the critical finding. Their actual DNA sequence wasn't significantly more mutated. Their telomeres were fine, their mitochondria weren't directly hit. It was the epigenetic noise, the disruption caused by the constant repairs, that drove the aging.
That is incredibly compelling. It really nails the idea that it's the information chaos, the scratch DVD, as he calls it, not just damage accumulation in the traditional sense.
Precisely. It strongly supported this information theory.
Okay, so if we accept this definition, aging is this specific kind of information loss, driven by epigenetic disruption. What does that mean for us, for how we should think about health medicine?
Well, the biggest implication is Sinclair's boldest claim. Aging isn't just some inevitable part of life, it is a disease process, a treatable one.
A disease, that's a huge shift.
It really is. He criticizes our current medical approach, calling it whack-a-mole medicine. You know, we have thousands of disease codes, 14,000 in the WHO classification. We treat heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, all as separate things. We wait for the mole to pop up, then we whack it.
Right, treating the symptoms of the individual manifestation.
Exactly. But what's the single biggest risk factor for all of those diseases? It's aging, getting older. Being 50 increases your cancer risk 100-fold compared to being young. Being 70, 1,000-fold. That dwarfs the risk from smoking, yet we pour billions into fighting cancer, but almost nothing into fighting aging itself, the root cause.
That whack-a-mole idea makes so much sense. But if aging is a disease, why isn't it officially classified like that? What are the roadblocks?
That's a really good question. Part of it is just deep-seated cultural belief, isn't it? That aging is natural, inevitable, something you just accept. And then there's the whole structure of medicine and pharmaceuticals. Drugs get approved to treat specific, defined diseases. There's no FDA pathway right now to approve a drug for aging. Sinclair argues this classification is crucial. If aging were officially a disease, it would unlock funding, incentivize research, allow insurance to cover preventative treatments. It changes the entire landscape.
He uses some thought experiments to drive this home, right?
Yeah, they're quite effective. He says, imagine if we discovered some weird line 1 virus tomorrow that caused heart disease, cancer, and dementia. Would absolutely call it a disease and race to find a cure, right? Or picture a world where most people live healthily to 150, but your family starts wrinkling, getting frail, and declining at 80. You'd absolutely say your family has a disease compared to everyone else.
It forces you to see it differently.
It does. And he points out this decline starts way earlier than we think. Peak physical fitness can start dropping in our 20s or 30s. Wounds heal slower. Think about something like a diabetic foot ulcer. For an older person, that can be lethal. The 5-year mortality rate is higher than for many cancers. This isn't just about adding years, decades from now, it's impacting health today.
It's such a powerful reframing. Okay, so if we start thinking of aging as this underlying treatable condition, what does Sinclair's work suggest we can actually do about it? What tools are there now or coming soon?
Right, so the good news is this deep dive shows we already have tools. And yeah, many more are definitely on the horizon. Let's start with things we can influence through lifestyle. Calorie restriction, CR, and intermittent fasting, IF. These have shown, well, really incredible promise in activating those longevity pathways we talked about, the sirtuins and the survival circuit. Studies in everything from yeast to rats to rhesus monkeys. Some monkeys on CR live to 40, which is like a human living to 120. Show it can extend lifespan and health span.
But CR sounds hard. Do you have to starve yourself?
Well, the most dramatic results are often with significant restriction, yeah. But human studies are tricky, obviously. However, even moderate calorie reduction, like 15%, has shown health benefits. And intermittent fasting or periodic fasting, maybe skipping meals or having cycles of lower calorie intake, seems to mimic many of the benefits of CR without constant deprivation. It triggers those same stress responses that boost defenses. Things like lowering IGF-1, which is linked to aging.
So stressing the body a little bit in the right way is actually good.
Exactly. It's called hormesis. Mild stress activates defenses, and that leads into diet composition. Sinclair suggests leaning towards more plant-based protein, less of the branched-chain amino acids found heavily in meat, fish, eggs. He jokes your plate should look more like a rabbit's lunch than a lion's dinner. That seems to help metabolic health and longevity markers.
Okay, diet makes sense. What about exercise? We always hear it's good for us, but how does it fit into this information theory?
Oh, exercise is huge. It's way more than just burning calories or building muscle. It directly activates our longevity genes. It boosts NAD levels, that crucial molecule sirtuins need to function. It favorably modulates other key pathways like AMPK and mTOR, which regulate metabolism and growth. And yes, it activates the sirtuins themselves. High-intensity interval training, HIIT, seems particularly effective. It turns on more of these beneficial genes, even in older people. Studies show it can even make telomeres, those protective caps on chromosomes, look almost a decade younger biologically.
Wow, exercise is a genetic tune-up.
Yeah.
That's compelling. Any other lifestyle hacks?
Yeah, he touches on hot and cold exposure. Getting cold, even just shivering, can activate brown fat, which is metabolically active, and boost SUT3, another sirtuin linked to reducing risks of diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's, saunas too. That temporary heat stress seems to trigger similar protective pathways. The Finns might be onto something.
So embracing a bit of discomfort seems key.
It seems so. And finally, under lifestyle is avoiding unnecessary DNA damage. We talked about DNA breaks triggering the problem. So minimizing exposure where possible makes sense. Things like air pollution, certain chemicals and plastics definitely don't microwave food and plastic. Azo dyes in some foods, compounds in cured meats like bacon, especially when cooked crispy. Of course, you can't avoid all damage. Just living, replicating cells causes trillions of breaks, which is why we need those internal repair systems and maybe ways to boost them.
Right, you can't live in a bubble. So that brings us to the molecules and drugs. What are the big players there?
Okay, this is where it gets really exciting, potentially. There's rapamycin, found in soil on Easter Island, amazingly. It inhibits that mTOR pathway we mentioned. It has shown really consistent life-extending effects across a huge range of organisms, from yeast to mice. It's one of the most reliable longevity compounds found so far in labs.
Interesting. What else?
Metformin. This is a really common, inexpensive drug used for type 2 diabetes, but large studies notice something else. Diabetics taking metformin seem to have lower rates of all-cause mortality, less cancer, less heart disease, even compared to non-diabetics. It suggests metformin is doing something beneficial beyond just controlling blood sugar, likely acting on those core aging pathways like AMPK. Sinclair himself takes it.
A diabetes drug with potential anti-aging effects.
Exactly. Then there's resveratrol. That's the compound often associated with red wine, though you'd need gallons to get a therapeutic dose. It's found in stressed plants. This is an example of xenohormesis. We benefit from the stress compounds plants make for their own defense. Resveratrol mimicking some effects of calorie restriction, it extended yeast lifespan dramatically, helped worms, and improved health markers in obese mice.
Okay, resveratrol, metformin, rapamycin. What about the NAD boosters? They seem to get a lot of buzz.
Yes, NAD boosters like NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, or NR, nicotinamide riboside. NAD is absolutely crucial for sirtuins to work. and NAD levels decline significantly as we age. So the idea is simple. Boost NAD levels back up. The results in mice have been pretty spectacular. Old mice, given NMN, showed reversal of type 2 diabetes symptoms. Their mitochondria started functioning like young ones again, and they had dramatic improvements in endurance, balance, coordination, strength, even memory. Sinclair described them running like teenagers again.
Those results sound almost too good to be true. And Sinclair mentions his own family taking these things.
He does. He shares anecdotes about his father, who started taking metformin and NMN around age 80 and apparently experienced this incredible reinvigoration. Started traveling again, new career projects, feeling decades younger than his own mother felt at that age. Sinclair himself, his brother, even his dogs are apparently on NAD boosters. There's a story about his dog with a kidney defect showing improvement.
Okay, the family and dog stories are compelling anecdotes, but you hear controversial reports mentioned too, like about fertility. How much of this is solid science versus early hype, especially for humans? How do we balance that excitement with caution?
That is absolutely the right question to ask. It's critical to distinguish. The animal studies, particularly for NMN and metformin, are robust and published in top journals. The mechanisms are becoming clearer, but robust, large-scale human trials showing definitive lifespan extension or reversal of aging. We're not quite there yet for many of these. Smaller human trials have shown safety and some positive effects on biomarkers like improved insulin sensitivity or endurance, but it's still early days for proving long-term impact on major diseases or lifespan in humans. The anecdotes, like Sinclair's father or the fertility stories, are just that, anecdotes. They're interesting, potentially hypothesis-generating, but not scientific proof. We need controlled studies. Sinclair himself acknowledges this, emphasizing the need for more research while choosing to act on the current evidence for himself.
That's a really important distinction. Exciting potential, but the human proof is still developing. So, looking even further ahead, beyond pills, what about the really cutting-edge tech?
Yeah, the future stuff is pretty mind-bending. First, senolytics. These are drugs specifically designed to kill off senescent cells, sometimes called zombie cells. These are cells that stop dividing but don't die. They just hang around, spewing out inflammatory signals that damage surrounding tissues and contribute to aging and diseases like arthritis, fibrosis. Senolytics act like targeted missiles to clear out these bad actors. The first human trial started around 2018, looking at things like osteoarthritis and glaucoma with some promising early results.
Clearing out the zombie cells. Sounds useful. What else?
Reprogramming. This is maybe the most radical, think Benjamin button effect. Using specific genetic factors, like the Yamanaka factors discovered for making stem cells, researchers are finding they can essentially reset the epigenetic clock in cells. They can make old cells function like young cells again without erasing their identity, like turning a skin cell back into an embryo. Studies in mice engineered to age prematurely showed reprogramming could extend their lifespan by 40%. In normal older mice, it helped injuries heal faster. The potential holy grail is maybe a temporary treatment, like a pill course for a month that could reverse some aspects of aging. Still mostly gene therapy now, but the potential is huge.
No, resetting the clock. And you mentioned tracking too.
Right. Precision medicine and biotracking. We're getting so much better at reading our own biology. DNA sequencing can already predict how you might respond to certain drugs, guide diet choices, maybe even spot cancer risk years earlier. And think about wearable sensors, rings, watches, maybe even car seats constantly monitoring heart rate, temperature, sleep, movement. This real-time data could guide daily health decisions, like adjusting diet or exercise based on your body's response. Sinclair mentions a colleague whose life was saved because an app tracking her menstrual cycle flagged an anomaly that turned out to be early-stage tumors. Early detection is key.
That real-time feedback loop sounds powerful, but does raise questions about data privacy, doesn't it? Having all that intimate health data floating around.
Absolutely. That's a huge societal conversation we need to have, and quickly. The technology is moving so fast. How do we harness the incredible health benefits while safeguarding privacy and preventing misuse? It's a major challenge that goes hand in hand with these advances.
Definitely something to watch. Any other big future tech?
Well, advanced vaccines. We saw with COVID how quickly vaccine tech can move. Imagine vaccines not just for infectious diseases, but maybe targeting senescent cells or even certain aspects of cancer development. The Prevnar vaccine against pneumonia showed how vaccinating kids could dramatically reduce the disease in older adults too, extending average lifespan. And finally, organ generation. The shortage of donor organs is a massive problem. But imagine growing replacement organs in genetically modified pigs, making them compatible with humans, or even 3D printing tissues and complex organs using a patient's own stem cells. No waiting lists, no rejection issues. It's moving from sci-fi towards reality.
Okay, reprogramming, senolytics, biotracking, new organs. This isn't just about living a bit longer, is it? This could fundamentally change society. What are the big ripple effects we need to think about?
Oh, absolutely. The implications are massive, and frankly, we need to start preparing now because Sinclair argues prolonged healthy lifespans are inevitable. First, there are always population concerns. People immediately think of Malthus or Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, worrying about too many people, not enough resources. But Sinclair pushes back, pointing out that historically, these predictions have often underestimated human ingenuity. Think advances in food production GMOs, better farming, maybe plant-based protein water conservation, plus the fact that as societies get wealthier and healthier, birth rates tend to fall naturally. He uses the example of London in the 19th century. Population growth led to terrible cholera outbreaks, but that spurred innovations in sanitation and public health that ultimately improved life for everyone. Challenges can drive solutions.
So maybe not automatic doom and gloom on the population front. What about our social structures? Pensions, retirement?
Yeah, political and social structures face huge disruption. Our current systems, like Social Security or retirement plans, were designed when people lived much shorter lives. They simply can't sustain populations where people might live healthily for 30, 40, 50 years past traditional retirement age. There's literally no economic model for that right now. And politically, imagine leaders potentially serving for a century. It raises all sorts of questions about power, turnover, democracy.
That's a huge challenge. It leads right into another really concerning point. Inequality. We know the wealthy already tend to live longer, invest more in health. If these advanced longevity treatments are expensive, at least initially, couldn't that create a massive gap? How do we ensure these benefits are shared?
This is perhaps the most critical ethical and societal challenge. Sinclair is very aware of this risk. He argues strongly against the idea that pursuing longevity is somehow selfish or unnatural, calling that kind of thinking deadly hogwash. His core argument for defining aging as a disease is precisely aimed at this problem. If it's a disease, insurance might cover treatments, governments might fund research for accessible solutions, market forces could drive down costs eventually. The goal has to be equitable access. Otherwise, yes, the potential for exacerbating inequality is enormous.
So classifying it as a disease is key to democratizing it.
That's the hope. And on the flip side, think about the value of elders. If people can remain healthy, active, and mentally sharp for much longer, imagine the contribution. More years of experience, innovation, mentorship. It could lead to huge increases in productivity and wealth, completely upending our current ideas about mandatory retirement and age discrimination.
A potential longevity dividend.
Potentially. But of course, all this brings up intense ethical debates. People worry about playing God. Sinclair counters that we already play God every time we treat cancer or heart disease. We're fighting diseases given by Mother Nature. Debates around privacy, as we mentioned with biotracking, will intensify. And difficult questions around the right to die will become more prominent. If life can be extended, what about the choice to end it peacefully, especially if health eventually fails? He mentions David Goodall, the 104-year-old scientist who had to travel to Switzerland for assisted dying. These issues become much more real.
It's clear we need to be having these conversations now, not just about the science, but about what kind of future we want to build with it.
Absolutely. And to bring it back to the practical, Sinclair does share his own daily regimen, not necessarily as a prescription for everyone, but as an example of how he applies the current knowledge.
Right. What does he personally do?
He mentions taking 1 gram of NMN and 1 gram of resveratrol mixed in yogurt, apparently, for better absorption every morning, plus 1 gram of metformin. He also takes daily vitamin D, K2, and a low dose, 83 milligram of aspirin. Diet-wise, he aims for low sugar, bread, pasta, skips lunch most days, a form of intermittent fasting, tries to stay cool, and maintains an optimal BMI around 23-25. He stresses getting high-purity, GMP-certified supplements, which is important advice given the unregulated nature of the market.
He feels it works for him.
He says he feels the same at 50 as he did at 30, mentions having the cardiovascular health of a 30-year-old, no gray hair, few wrinkles. And as we noted, his wife and even his dogs are on similar regimens based on the science. It shows his personal conviction.
And his core message seems to be that labeling aging as a disease is the fastest way to drive the innovation needed to make these benefits widespread.
Exactly. To free up funding, streamline regulation, and ensure these breakthroughs don't just stay with the wealthy elite. He notes that serious international conferences on longevity are now commonplace, and the scientists aren't debating if it will happen anymore, but what we should do when it happens.
The momentum seems undeniable.
The pace of change is just exponential. It often surprises even the experts. We have to be actively looking for ways to engage our body's own defenses, based on solid evidence, of course.
It really opens up incredible possibilities.
Hmm.
Sinclair leaves us with a powerful question, doesn't he? How do we wish to spend those extra healthy years?
He does. And perhaps the ultimate marker of how far we've come as a species will be the answer to a different, starker question. How do you die?
Hmm.
He argues our current way is often protracted, painful, traumatic for everyone involved. A truly advanced society, he suggests, would aim for a future where healthy longevity is the norm, and the end, when it comes, can be peaceful, dignified, and on one's own terms.